This episode is sponsored by the IoT job site, the world's only dedicated space for applying for and advertising IoT vacancies across the world. Register now for job alerts or get in touch via let's talk at theiotjobsite.com.
Welcome back to the IoT podcast. I'm your host, Tom White. This is part 2 of the Telia special. Today we're joined by Rachit Saksena. Rachit is a true innovator and strategist at Telia Division X. With more than a decade of experience in both horizontal and vertical IoT solutions, his expertise ranges from applications, data delivery to SIMs and connectivity, and across challenging payment and billing models. Rachit is currently heading up IoT Portfolio Management at Telia, and he has a strong belief that scalability needs simplicity. And I think that's a great phrase that we can all remember. Guys, quick favour, as ever, please like, comment and subscribe. You'll get notified when there's a new episode. I don't care how you're connected, just as long as you're connected. Rachit, welcome to the IoT podcast show.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, it's great to have you here. Obviously, this is part 2 of our Telia special, or Telia. I can never pronounce it just right because I'm not from a Nordic region, but I'm trying so hard. Very interested to hear your thoughts today. Obviously, Rachit, you're head of IoT Portfolio Management. Can you explain a little bit more about what you do within the business, please?
Right. So, I think Telia Company, we serve millions of customers. We connect them every day, entertain them, and help businesses get successful in their, in their adventures. So, it's quite fun to be in the most connected region in Nordics and Baltics across the world. So, very exciting place to be in, and we are within Telia. We are on a mission to explore, build, scale, and commercialize, the digital transformation and industry of things, which is a very focused unit within the Telia Group. So that's where we work, and one of the key things that me and my team does is basically understanding what challenges that does the enterprises have in terms of connecting their assets and transforming their business models from product to services when the technology is so available today all around us.
Yeah, fantastic. And of course, for our listeners who heard Bjorn, Telia is focused predominantly in the Nordic regions as a business.
Right.
So Nordic and Baltic regions, and one of the largest operators in the space. Fantastic track record. Getting straight into it then, Rachit. So to talk about global connectivity, so obviously a key enabler of IoT, allowing devices to exchange information with various centralized IoT applications. Massively important that we have connectivity around this, and lots of people are talking about the advent of eSIMs, moving on from the traditional physical SIM that people used to have, and lots of progression in that field. When it comes to global connectivity, customers are obviously faced with a multitude of challenges, from scalability to control. In your view, what are the prominent challenges you see customers facing when it comes to connecting their products and solutions on a global scale?
Right. I think one of the key challenges that has come up in last 5 years is around compliance and regulations, right? And more and more, what we see happening in the world is that the countries are regulating how the data is processed, how the data flows, from a security perspective. But also, we see a huge commercial trend from the operators to protect their sort of boundaries and say, uh, in a way, help the capture the local markets in the best possible way. So the enterprises are forced to source connectivity locally, which wasn't the problems like 10 years ago when roaming did not have any regulations. So permanent roaming is coming up to like one of the key challenges when it comes to sourcing connectivity to connect your products. And that also creates additional work for the enterprises, because then they need to have the right kind of sourcing team. They need to have a technical aggregation team where they can connect different networks coming into their backend. So they very quickly deviate from just trying to buy connectivity for their products into a number of regulatory issues, a number of integration issues, a number of security issues, um, and and that creates a massive organization within an enterprise to be able to deal with all these different kind of issues,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Um, eSIM, of course, as you mentioned, has been one of the thought of as a solution to have at least from logistics perspective have like one SIM card that can have multiple operators. But I think it's a part of the puzzle. The challenge that comes with it, once you have switched from one operator to another operator, how do you maintain the same network performance? How do you maintain the same service assurance and revenue assurance and all those different aspects?
yeah. People talk about this a lot, because you can monitor your own and how that works. But when it goes to another MNO or another carrier, for instance, how does that stability work? You can't necessarily ensure that it will be of the same standard as to your own. And permanent roaming, as you say, is a must have, right? Because otherwise, I think is it 3 months, Rashid, currently, before then it kind of reverts. There's a time frame, isn't there, on roaming at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there are two types of use cases. One
Yeah,
is, where the devices can go in and go out of a country, right?
yeah,
uh, and that is not really affected by permanent roaming. But then there are other kind of regulations in countries like some of the East Asian countries, where if you are a enterprise local registered in that country, you actually cannot buy connectivity from a foreign operator. You need to register in a database where you need to basically broadcast which devices, which phone numbers are actually consuming this, what are the use cases behind those connected devices. So it's not only from a roaming perspective, but there are a lot of different kind of regulations coming up that enterprises usually are not aware of. When they're starting, going from a pilot phase into a global rollout, and we still meet customers on a daily basis that are surprised about how critical these requirements are and how deeply they can be penalized if they're not following the regulations. And
yeah,
and that is something that Telia has done. What we have done is we have put together a specialized team around research on regulations and compliance, on roaming, on data processing, and also on taxation. So a few countries have taxation requirements that never come up, as an enterprise. If you're doing business more than 50,000 euros, for example, in an East Asian country, then you need to register your business as you're generating that kind of revenues, and you need to then pay taxes on it. So it's a number of different scenarios coming up as we try and tackle this global connectivity challenge.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting you should say that. Clearly, compliance, regulatory, hardware, technical, and these have all been in past blockers really for mass adoption of IoT devices, and why we don't have the 500 billion devices that we thought we would have 10 years ago. Right?
Right.
Interested to get into it about the solution. So Telia's global IoT connectivity. So how do you look to solve these problems then?
Well, I think we wouldn't have solved it 10 years ago, but it's much easier now
Mm,
because eSIM is becoming more like a basic hygiene requirement from the operators. There's a increased understanding from the operators that they need, if they want to be in the IoT business, they need to have a subscription management solution that supports eSIM technology. So that's going very well. Also, I initially mentioned that what happens when you switch the subscription to another operator, you land into a different network. There's a different IP address, there's a different firewall, there's different latency at the end of it. So, which is where I think we have done something very different and pioneering. We deployed a programmable network in one of the public clouds, and we have locations in almost every continent. So all the underlying operators that are part of our connectivity framework are pushing the data to the closest cloud location, and we make sure that the firewalls and the policies are administered once for the entire stack of the SIM cards. And as and when we add more and more operators, the enterprise don't really need to worry about the security and the latency, data processing also, because all of that we have already taken care of, just because now the technology from the hyperscalers are so easily available to be able to deploy this programmable network, right? So it's, you can think of it as a triangle between supporting eSIM ecosystem with integrations with operators, then bringing a aggregation layer on the top where all the data and SMS comes into a single managed network, and then thirdly it's the research around regulations and compliance and taxation that actually makes it possible and gives the confidence to the enterprise to buy one SIM from Telia, to have one commercial agreement with Telia, and rest assured that they can go on with their business.
Rashid, what are the trends and new technologies in your view shaping the future of IoT global connectivity?
I think we need to make sure that both the service providers like us and the enterprises understands the trends and the risks around regulations. There is a lot of different movements. Europe is having a different flavor of requirements than North America, which is different than Australia, which is different than Asia. So there needs to be a dedicated and a conscious effort to understand the complexity around regulations. And I think that's one of the biggest trends that we'll see in the future, because as now we go from 2G, 3G into 4G, where some of the networks are still deploying 4G networks, and then more advanced countries are deploying 5G. I think that gives an opportunity for the local regulators to come up with new policies, because we're transforming the whole network, we're changing the infrastructure, and we've put in the specification and the standards to be able to do a multiple of different kind of configurations that can create different kind of technically enabled policies and regulations. So that's one of the biggest trends, right? Also, roaming is a key. I think 2G, 3G is being shut down across the world. We still have customers that are sunsetting from old technology to the new technologies. So the enterprises needs to really collaborate in order to make sure that their use cases are not jeopardized in this migration that's happening across the world. And at the same time, it will take time, and enterprises needs to understand very clearly, all our customers, that it will take time before the operators are talking again on the new technology in terms of roaming partnerships and doing 5G roaming agreements, LTE, narrowband, LTM. These all require different kind of configurations and testing before they become very much globally industrially consumed services.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, fantastic insights there. And often is the case, isn't it, that technology advancements sometimes can be hindered through social economical, I don't want to say problems, but regulatory advice that needs to be fixed, right? So, in order for countries to cooperate and work together in order to bring this together can sometimes be a limiting factor. And often some are ahead of others, aren't they, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a very good example in front of us where the adoption of electronic vehicles is consuming so much electric components that's creating a shortage on almost every supply chain. Right? So you never know how adoption of one technology can disrupt the existing ecosystem. So I think this is where enterprises really, and along with the collaboration with the service providers, needs to tackle these challenges together.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, EV, fantastic technology, but equally, as you say, if you put too much stress on that, it's at the detriment to other things and
Right.
causing shortages in the supply chain. And I don't want to touch upon the pandemic, and I think we've all had enough talking about it.
Yes.
But that certainly hasn't helped
No.
with anything that we're going through and being able to fix some of those issues. So yeah, completely understand. And I think, but it's exciting, right? And I say this to a lot of people at the moment. We're on the precipice of a real revolution, because people talk about IoT being the major component of Industry 4.0, but I don't know about you, but this whole metaverse wave that's coming through as well over the last 6 months, with recent news of Microsoft acquiring Activision and various things when it comes to haptics, etc. This whole technology revolution again of this fourth wave that Klaus Schwab has talked about in his book, and it's really quite engulfing, isn't it? And that leads me really nicely to my next question when we come back to IoT. Is we talk about trends and technologies, but what does the future hold for global IoT connectivity, and where will we ideally be, and what technologies will be used at the forefront?
I think as the networks become more and more fragmented, due to introduction of 5G, introduction of new ways of separating micro networks from macro networks. Uh, Collaboration is a very important piece. Collaboration not between enterprises and the service provider, but we as a telecom community need to collaborate better with other operators, so we make lives of our enterprises easier, instead of ring fencing that enterprises cannot buy connectivity in this region. And I think because it creates a leakage of revenues. I think we need to really understand the collaboration benefit that we can bring to enterprises, and that is something what we have done uh, quite forward leaning in this global connectivity offering, where we have partnered up with tier one operators across the continents and make sure that we have back to back agreements and contracts, so our enterprises can just buy from Telia, and we make sure that we have complied to most of the pain points that the enterprises have.
Yeah,
Right. So,
yeah,
so partnership is being one. And then I think really using, from a telco standpoint, most of the telcos have had on-prem solutions, on-prem technology, their own data centers to manage. And I think there's a huge wave coming in from the hyperscalers, the push. So I think really it's a point or a time in the curve where you see, how do you build better networks? How do you build better scalability with the upcoming technology? So I think that's going to be one of the future trends that at least Telia will be working on quite actively.
yeah. I mean, in terms of Telia, so lots of things you're doing at the moment. Well spoken about. Bjorn has spoken about that in part one of this special that we're doing at the moment. Um, what role does Telia play in the future? What other things can we expect to see? Surely you can't tell us all the secret sauce right now, but in terms of things that you can talk about, we'd be really interested to know that, Rashid.
Right. So I think we have already, I think, said quite many times, and this is why enterprises are coming to us, because we take a position of a partner orchestrator, and not just in connectivity solutions, but also in different verticals that we go into, that we bring in the right partners, the relevant partners that understands the niche, understands the
Yeah,
regulations, understands the lingo and the language that a business needs. So Telia being a partner orchestrator, we will bring and source connectivity from all parts of the world, and we focus on Nordics and Baltics markets. So enterprises that are close to our heart can go global without having the fear of disruptions in their business in the future, right? So
Yeah.
it's mainly, partner orchestration is one of the key roles. Then the other area where service providers have a key role to play, like Telia, is to simplify regulations, is to understand, how does a piece of taxation act, or a cloud act, or permanent roaming or data processing, how does that impact the business of the enterprise? So there needs to be a conscious effort being put into understanding regulations, simplifying them with the help of technology, and giving that as a benefit to the enterprises. Right, and
Yeah.
and this cannot happen without taking a position of an innovation lead, and which is where we are addresses positioned today as an innovation leader in Nordics and Baltics, with coming up, pioneering technologies and ways of work, simplified business models. I think all of that needs to happen. That we are on the journey on.
Yeah, it's I guess for me as a as a techie at heart, having come from an engineering background, you sometimes forget the regulatory taxation compliance piece, which is so critical to the interlinking of the technology, as we touched upon in the past, right? Um,
And I think that's one of the key challenges in the industry, right? The technology has become cheaper and more available, so it's very easy to have successful pilots and demonstrate your use cases. Yeah. But when you think about scale, you need a partner that you can trust, uh, that takes you places.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. What's the bigger challenge then, the technology or the regulatory issues?
Technology isn't a challenge. Technology always solves itself. I think the main of the challenges is around understanding regulations, and then finding the right people with enough knowledge to actually guide service provider enterprises with the advice. Right. If you scan the market today, there are hardly any companies that do a regulatory research from an IoT specific purposes and use cases. You can buy taxation advice, you can buy a regulatory advice from a roaming perspective, you can buy data processing and data center regulation advice, but you need a partner who actually connects these, and comes up with, hey, country by country, region by region, this is how we're going to solve this.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Because IoT, it's been around for a while, right? We talk about machine to machine connectivity. People have been talking about this for certainly the last 5-6 years or so. Why can't you still find that today? Again, in your view.
I think the information is there if you know somebody who can connect these dots. The problem comes, we as I said, we are at the edge of transforming our infrastructure. We are changing. We're going from on-prem to virtualized networks. We are going from a 2G, 3G to 4G and 5G devices. So the entire infrastructure in the back end is changing as we speak, right?
Mm,
And that gives the ability for the standards organization and regulatory bodies to think, okay, how does this impact my country, how does this impact security threats, different kind of policies. So as the technology around us changing quite rapidly, so as the thought process on how to safeguard with the more agility that the technology brings.
mm, mm.
So that's one of the key areas that I think us in Telia with a specialized group, but also our partners, whether it's hyperscalers or other operators, we are collaborating almost on a weekly basis on understanding, hey, what's happening? How does cloud act, or how does this taxation law in Thailand, or the local buying policy in Singapore? How does this impact the overall enterprise when they're sitting in Nordics and thinking about shipping connected assets all over the world?
And I think that's one of the beauty of working collaboratively with the hyperscalers, isn't it? People talk about, if you can't beat them, join them, or what have you. But I think there's an element of, they have that presence, they have that information, they have people there. You can work with them to, take this further. And I think, and again, at its core, what we're trying to do here is connect devices and environments to the internet for the better of the world, for the better of people, and for the enrichment. And that relationship with the hyperscalers is important, right? And it's important to be able to roll that out.
Absolutely, and not just hyperscalers. I think it's also important to see the ecosystem of hyperscalers, because now we have seen such an innovation from companies to deploy their applications, virtualize them, and put them in a hyperscale environment that can be consumed quite easily by both the service providers and the enterprises. Right? If you see, one of the biggest challenge, if I put it, for any of the service provider in this space, is that the technology is so easily available that the enterprises themselves are taking a leap here by trying and do everything by themselves, from doing pilots to getting devices, designing the network, designing the backend application. And it works quite well for regional use cases. But when you start thinking about going global and you don't really know what kind of framework awaits for your enterprise to comply to, that's where we have seen problems. And so our biggest competition is not other service providers or other technology companies. I think it's mainly the enterprises and the networks and the innovation agendas within them. What I think needs to come out quite clearly is, like, there needs a need and from the enterprises to ask for collaboration and ask for a partner who has done this before, right? And that's the position Telia has taken for almost 2 years now, where we have established ourselves as one of the key players in this arena, where enterprises can trust us. And more regulations will come, more and more networks will become fragmented because of 5G coming, as the infrastructure is being replaced. Here's a lot of emphasis, on the way of work, on understanding and asking the right questions when it comes to a scale out.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as I started this episode with yourself today and speaking to Bjorn, Division X, what Telia has done is really well regarded. I'm keen to understand, and I know our listeners would be crying out for this. I mean, is it possible to put timescales on this to know when some of these things are likely to happen, like the advent of permanent roaming? Is this going to be happening this year? Or are we looking 5 years away? How long do you think it's going to take before these things start to piece together?
This is happening already now, and last 2 years mainly. And now we have, as we go in more and more research into more countries, we understand, like, at least we have 5 to 8 countries on our list where the government and the regulators haven't decided what policies to come. But what we get from with these research companies, like, hold on, don't put a long-term technology solution to solve that country, because the regulators are coming up with new regulations. Right. So this started all the way, from Brazil. I think one of the first countries to ban permanent roaming, and then China followed, and Australia has commercial roaming bans, and you're penalized by the operators if you don't declare. The same goes for US and Canada. We know India is coming up with regulations around data processing. Russia has already regulations around data centers. So there's a lot of different types of movement. It's not only permanent roaming. You could be into a scenario where taxation becomes a challenge, where, like in UAE, you need a local entity and you need to buy from local operator
And a sponsor, don't you? Right, you need a sponsor to, yeah.
So this has been happening all the time, and it'll keep happening. Um, and I think we are in a position where we have done almost research on 50-ish countries where most of the IoT is happening, and we continue to keep that updated on a depending on the advice, sometimes quarterly basis, sometimes once a year.
Yeah, and I think that's the theme really here, isn't it? It's technology and regulation in a kind of two-horse race.
Exactly. And I'm quite grateful to the technology available today, because then we can solve these challenges head on. We can use eSIM to switch to another operator because there's a local legislation to have a local subscription or a commercial. Then we can add a local programmable network on the top to route all the data. So we align with the data processing and data sovereignty kind of requirements. We can deploy local connectivity platform like the IoT platform on the top that takes care of the GDPR issues and the storage of data in the local country. So I think the technology is just there. You need to have the right mindset, understand what are the different challenges, and have a modular architecture so you can go from solving permanent regulation to taxation in the same stack.
What a fantastic way to end the show. And what a fantastic line there. I mean, really, really useful, really, really interesting. Rachit, it's been fantastic to have your views on this, really complementary to what Bjorn was talking about. Fascinating. And some of the work that Telia is doing is great. And I'm glad you've been able to share the story to our viewers and listeners. At this part of the show, we always ask our previous guest to think of a question for our next guest. And our previous guest that we had on was Rob Hollands. Rob is the managing director of Sharpends, which is a agency of IoT. They're very much involved in the connected packaging space. So working with businesses around QR codes and NFC technology to monitor asset tracking effectively, right? Rob asked you the question. He says, in your personal view, and you can only pick one because I think there's multiple answers to this. What is the single most biggest challenge for IoT coming specifically this year?
The biggest challenge is, as I said, is with the enterprises and their innovation leads to understand that it's easier to do a technical proof of concepts and pilots in a region. But when you're thinking about a scale out, you need to reach out to partners that you can trust. So the need of having a collaborative approach when you're developing new use cases needs to be advised to all the enterprises, and they need to make sure that they have the right kind of technical stack as well when they're going from a regional solution to a global solution.
Rachit Saksena, Telia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was a great show.
Rachit, thank you so much for joining us today on the IoT podcast. As always, guys, please find us on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn under the IoT podcast. Check out our website, theiotpodcast.com, where you can watch this and all previous episodes. Get involved in the conversation. What are your thoughts on global IoT connectivity, the advent of permanent roaming and eSIMs? We'd like to hear it. Cheers.